It's a shorter movie.
So we're getting our technical ducks in a row here.
They asked to see what the group of 40 years ago would be like if you brought them all together again at one time.
And here we are.
And this is how it turned out.
You get what you ask for.
Now, Robards is not coming, correct?
He's on location. That's my new phrase for death. He's on location.
Or so he hasn't done anything for a while.
This will bring him back.
That's that favorite old expression. So he hasn't done anything in a while.
So
Okay.
Bengals and the Jaguars.
Right.
They're by themselves. Monday is all there.
14-7.
Okay, panel, hold on just a second.
Still the Jaguars.
I'm recording it for Scott.
Jaguars are up, and they own the day. They own the night. Monday is a single night with a single team in a single game. So it's the Bengals and the Jaguars. And if Lawrence pulls it off today, I'm very excited. He's bringing the Jaguars up, and he'll make big money next year. Not this year.
Is the
Next
guy,
year.
the main guy out? No, that's the game.
Yeah. Liberty Hall is where the meeting is going on, and they're about to bring us in. So.
Is it true that Lawrence, Kansas is getting an NFL team?
Could be.
And you have a turnout.
the radioactives.
Radioactives. Glow in the dark.
Okay, if our
And our
panel
host
is
from
quiet.
Australia is with us, or
No, I haven't seen Jeff.
Jeff? Where's Jeff?
Recording in progress.
Okay.
Okay. Are we about ready?
It's sure on.
Can they hear
It's
us?
on.
It's on. And we're
It's on.
ready.
We're all ready, but we can't see anyone.
Yes, we can. We see him.
I see Jeff walking around.
Yeah, Jeff's up there.
Okay, but they
And
can't hear
very
us.
bad
on
camera
the-
people.
No, he'll be coming up soon. Let me see.
Okay, panel, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Hello? Good.
Thanks for your patience. You are live in front of a packed audience at Liberty Hall in Lawrence, Kansas.
Okay, I'm going to hand the mic over to Arthur and Melanie to kick us off.
Melanie Bennett and I are the impact producers on this film and came here today, helped put together, initiate this event, because primarily we want to thank you, the people of Kansas, for being heroes, for heroically making your town the staging ground for literally saving the world. Thank you, Lawrence, Kansas. Secondly, we want to thank Lindsay Foat for an amazing job of organizing this event in a very short time, letting everybody know the wonderful press we've had turn out, the media, we've had a major impact, and we especially want to thank you as an audience. Your reactions were so phenomenal, encouraging, laughing at all the right places, enjoying everything. This has been so great for Jeff because this is the first time he's had film showings at film festivals, but this is the first theatrical premiere in the theater. And wow, what a great audience. Melanie Bennett and I put aside our own work as the director and producer of the movie The World Is My Country because we think that it is so vital that this new film, television event, have a major impact. Once again, we see the nations of the world rattling sabers, racing toward nuclear war, and the world seems to be sleepwalking into disaster. We want to wake them and shake them so they don't bake us. And I think Jeff Film does an amazing job of that. And so, to help increase the impact, I want to let Melanie Bennett tell you a little bit more how you can be part of using this film to have a major impact in helping, once again, to prevent nuclear war. Melanie Bennett.
Lawrence, Kansas, yes. You are the people that can make this happen. By the way, go ahead and write your questions down. We'll be picking those up for the panel questions. So have them come down to the end of the aisle. Thank you very much. And we'll be collecting them with our wonderful volunteers. Thank you very much. So yes, this is, how do you feel right now? How do you feel? Wow. You feel like you can do this. You saw the impact of just one or two people and a collaborative of everybody involved. What an impact that had for the world. Basically, we are here today and can thank Lawrence, Kansas for being a part of it. And we want Lawrence, Kansas to be the one start kicking it off where it doesn't happen again. Right now we're having the same difficulty, and we have a lot of ways that we can stop this. We don't need to have nuclear weapons. I think we can all agree. So back on this card that we gave you, you have a QR code. You can go to that code. It's the trailer, and then in the trailer is a description, and in there's the link to how you can take action. You can divest your money from the 24 companies that are making special nuclear weapons parts. So let's do it together. We can make this happen. Now let's give another round of applause to this amazing director, Jeff Daniels.
Okay, so while we gather your questions and the questions of our YouTube audience, let's lob Jeff a softball. And when was the first time you saw The Day After, and what made you decide to make this documentary about The Day After?
Yeah, I've been asked that question so many times as a documentary filmmaker. I started to wonder if that is the real story. Before I get into that, though, I just want to, I didn't thank, and I really want to thank the Free State Film Festival, which is such an important part of that. They also helped to put this on as part of their festival, which goes on during the summer, but also has a long life. And it's festivals like this where films like mine and other documentary filmmakers, sometimes it's the only place where they're seen. And it's audiences like yours that really allow these festivals to keep going, especially after COVID. So I'm so grateful to Marlo and to everyone at the Free State Film Festival for making this happen. And I'm also grateful for Liberty Hall. This is a literal example of what Lawrence stands for, a building that was burned to the ground because it stood for abolition and it rose from the ashes. What a perfect venue to show a film like this. Thanks to all the staff here and also volunteers that we had from Kansas University who were handing out some of the pencils and papers that we had. So I'm eager to hear your questions, and so are all these guys who we're going to get to in a second. I first saw the film when I was 5 years old. My whole family was watching it. Everyone was watching it in America. I seem to remember piling into my grandparents' basement in that's where their big TV was. All 40 members of my extended family rushed down to see The Day After. I think it may have been a VHS copy. My cousins have corrected my memory. I was 5 years old. But they had the sense to put me to bed before that horrifying sequence, that bombing sequence, but it stuck with me. You know, I got it. These people were about to die a slow, gruesome death, and that really affects you. And I think Ellen Moore really spoke to that when she said it does. It changes your faith in adults. You doubt them. You doubt these decisions. I think as an adult and a documentary filmmaker, I just thought, wait a second, ABC, the network that gave us The Love Boat and Happy Days in Fantasy Island, how could they drop an atomic bomb, a nuclear bomb on the American living room? And so when I looked into just how it happens, I realized this is a great story that must be told.
Yay!
That's right.
Jack's up here. So I don't know if this is the first time that all the people who are on the panel have been together. I mean, Jeff, do you have any questions for all of these esteemed folks that we have with us?
Absolutely. There's someone there who I haven't actually spoken to, Stephen Charles Jaffe.
Yeah, I get.
Oh, great. We have a lot more people also. So Stephen Charles was the second unit director and did a lot of, shot a lot of some of the more dangerous parts of the filming that you saw in this documentary. Stephen, can you explain, there was a story that I think you had about, you were in one of those helicopters, filming. Can you explain that, please?
We were filming our fake missile silo in the backyard of somebody's farm, and this was the second day we were arriving with our helicopters, and there were, Scott, I don't think you were in the helicopter that day, right? Maybe you were on the ground, but in any event, there were I think 4 or 5 military helicopters circling, hovering over our fake missile silo, and the pilot of our helicopter informed us that we were in the wrong place and we had to leave very quickly or consequences would occur. And my DP had a pilot's map, and he said, no, we're in the right place. They're in the wrong place, and we told our pilot to tell the commander of this fleet of helicopters they've made a terrible mistake, and this is not a real missile silo. Radio silence. You've got our helicopters hovering, their helicopters are hovering, and then in about 2 minutes they peeled off and disappeared. Clearly they understood that it was a fake missile silo. So that was an amusing thing. It certainly gave us a great sense of security for our military guarding the...
It's a microcosmic example of the fraying thread of good luck that has kept us from blowing ourselves to bits so far. There are numerous examples, as I'm sure everyone in the audience probably knows, of nukes that were dropped on North Carolina or Colonel Petrov, or the monkey wrench that fell down a missile silo in Arkansas and almost blew Arkansas off the map. You know, there's a long list of how lucky we've been, but you can't be lucky forever.
Wow, amazing.
Those guys and gals who are down in that missile silo or any of these missile silos have a really tough job. And how do you keep yourself from getting depressed? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real morale issue, isn't it?
It certainly is, and you know, I appreciate their tenacity if they do have tenacity, but it's it's a weird life to live there.
Well, when we were researching the movie, we went down into one of those missile silos at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and I remember seeing that there are 2 people down there, and each one of them has to turn a key. in order to launch the missile. And both of them are wearing sidearms. And I said, why do they have guns down here when there's only those two guys? And it was explained that if one guy refused to turn the key, the other guy could presumably offer to shoot him. And I said, but how does that succeed in turning the key? And I think the subject was changed at that time.
Don't be so practical.
So we have an audience question here, and it's, do you think the current leadership of Hollywood has the courage to make a movie that exposes real threats to humankind? I'll repeat it one more time. Do you think the current leadership of Hollywood has the courage to make a movie that exposes real threats to humankind?
Wow, what do you think about that, Bob Papazian?
Can you repeat it? Sorry.
So the question, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Good, okay. So the question is, do you think the current leadership of Hollywood has the courage to make a movie that exposes real threats to humankind?
Wait, there's leadership in Hollywood?
That's the first thing. I don't know what the definition of leadership in Hollywood is. The second thing is that about 2 years ago, in response to years and years of emails from scientists and private citizens asking if I would remake an updated version of The Day After, my partner Frank Spotnitz and I, we did Medici, Masters of Florence together, went to all the streamers and proposed an updated global version of The Day After. And I can say without fear of contradiction that the streamers hated this project as much as everybody at ABC, except Brandon Stoddard, hated this project when it was first proposed in 1982. Nobody wants to touch it. Nobody wants to think about nuclear war. None of us want to think about it.
It's amazing the opportunity that all these people took advantage, were able to take advantage of this this period where more people were watching network television than ever before or since 1983, and during sweeps week, you know, in November, that's exactly when that period was. So they really took advantage of that opportunity, and it's no wonder this film made such an impact. I have a question for Jack here. How the hell did you get 2,000 people to volunteer for that Fieldhouse scene?
Well, it wasn't me, of course. There were so many people involved in it. I think, as I recall, that time of our lives, when we decided we'd do this, and when I say we, I mean a lot of the students, as well as people that were connected to KU, decided to go ahead with this project. We sensed that something was special about this. And I know when I was on set every day and meeting with the extras, whether there were 30 extras or 1,500 extras, I would always have a session. I'd move around and talk with them, and there was a certain sense of quietness about them, a sense that they were doing something really important. And nobody knew what that something was, but as people put on makeup and as they got the shirts torn and everything was prepared for that day's shooting, there just was a sense that there was something special happening, because people just fell into those roles instantly. I mean, I teach acting, or taught acting for many years, and there was something about that day, the days that we shot the Day After, that people just naturally fell into the roles. And, that was an amazing thing for us to see.
Yeah, I mean, that leads on to a question I've been meaning to ask for years. To Steve Gutenberg, thanks so much for joining us, Steve. I've been dying to ask you about those nuclears. Can you explain what Nicholas Meyer was talking about?
Can anyone?
Can you hear us, Steve?
Probably not.
Oh, all right. We'll have to wait. We'll have to wait until Steve can come on. Maybe someone can type it in the chat so that he can explain. What did it? A question for Stephanie Austin and Scott Fowler. I believe you both met on the set of The Day After. And Stephanie was in charge of trying to make this film as real as possible. How did you respond when you saw people's reaction to The Day After after they'd seen it? With all that work that you've done to create a sense of realism, do you feel that it hit home?
I'm sorry, your volume is so low, I can't really hear you.
Oh, I hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can definitely hear you. Can you hear? Is this better?
Okay. First of all, I had met Scott in 1977, so long before. But aside from that, I think all of us who participated were overwhelmed by the kind of physicality of making a movie. Not in the normal way where you're long hours and all that, but when you're working with people who are in this post-nuclear makeup all day long, every day, and you're walking, through hospital beds filled with people who are dying. It really does affect you on so many levels, and I think all of us who participated in the film had to have a period of decompression after the movie, and it was really an extraordinary experience. So I think you would agree.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing that Bob and Nick and Stephanie did, I worked with Stephen Jaffe, and we were doing all the second unit and blowing stuff up and sort of just, not really keeping track. But what Bob and Stephanie and Nick did is they had the whole crew watch Hiroshima Mon Amour. And we all sat and we watched this film, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house when we came out. We were so freaked out as a crew making a film that we realized it wasn't just going to be Dukes of Hazzard blowing up stuff. It was going to be very specific and very real, and it really hit home, and it hit home to the crew. So your question is, how did it affect? Profoundly. I think that there wasn't a single person on the crew. It didn't matter what their politics or their religion or their size or their shape was. We all realized that we were in life jeopardy and we were really scared. And it remains to this day that you can never get that out of your mind.
It is ironic, isn't it, that 40 years hence, we're still in the same volatile political situation, and with all these risks, maybe even heightened.
Man, worse.
It is worse. We're actually closer to midnight, they say, right?
Wow. Now, Steve, can you hear me? Steve Gutenberg?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Okay. I wanted to ask, we have two actors here. We have Ellen Moore joining us, who played Jolene. And we have Steve Gutenberg. I've been meaning to ask you this question for a while, but really what the question is what was the most gut-wrenching scene for you to film? How did that affect you? I'd like to ask you first, Steve, and then if you can speak to that, Ellen, as well, please.
Oh, Ellen? You want to?
You first, Steve. What was that most gut-wrenching scene? Nick explains that you had these nuke mares. If you can explain that a bit more.
I can hardly hear you. Are you asking which scene affected me the most?
Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Nick.
Okay, they're asking what is your most wrenching experience that you played in the film? And also, you may recall that when we were shooting, you mentioned a couple of times that you had nuclear nightmares, which we called nuke mares. And I think they're asking you to talk about those two things, the most wrenching scene and the nightmares.
Well, probably the wrenching is wrenching scene was when I walked through the field house and the enormity of the field house and the deep tragedy that it was really affected me. But interestingly enough, Nick, you had the biggest conversation that affected me was Nick said years ago, before we did the picture, that people would have these conversations, and Nick would have conversations about nuclear war, but no one would ever do anything at these cocktail parties. And Nick said, you know what, I want to do something about this. And 40 years later, you remember that, Nick, when you said that?
Well, yes is the short answer. I do remember.
Yeah, it really affected me because so many people talk and very few people do things. And the nuclear nightmare that I had, recurring, and I would tell Nick about it all the time, was that I was in Los Angeles and there was a nuclear attack. And I went to a phone booth to try to call my parents, but they were in New York. And my mind said that New York was 3 hours ahead. The bomb had already gone off in New York. And I would have that nightmare almost every night before I shot. And it affected me just enormously. So yeah, there were nuke mares. Exactly that, Nick, nuke mares. Yeah.
And Ellen, there are people here who wanted to know a bit about the effect that filming these scenes would have had on you at that age. I know that this film came out about a year later after all of that filming had been done. I remember we talked a bit about this. It can be different for a child when you're going through this and then reflecting on it as an adult. Can you go a bit into that? How this affected you as a child and how you reflect on that now?
Well, at the time, can you hear me all right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, good. Thank you for having me. At the time, I had the nuke mares as well. I think as a child, you don't understand how to talk about it. And so a lot of these things I didn't talk about until adulthood. I talked about a lot of things with you, actually, in shooting the television event that I haven't talked about. I think I had an experience that was unique. People from Lawrence. Of course, there were a lot of actors in the film from Lawrence. And for us, I know I said this before, but for us, when you see the sites of, disaster and things are blown up or whatever, those are the, for those of us who were living there at the time, those were our spaces, our places that we lived, our everyday lives. And so even today, when I watch The Day After, I'm always interested in when people talk to me about, oh, isn't it so devastating to watch this? And I want to say, yes, it is. And you have no idea because that's my, that's my grocery store, that's my neighborhood, that's Massachusetts Street, that's my childhood, So, but, and then to go back to one of the things that you said, what was one of the most difficult scenes or moving scenes? Of course, the scene, I wasn't in the field house scene, but every time I've seen it, it's just knocks you out. But for me, it was the scene with the dog. And it's interesting, in an interview fairly recently, someone asked me about shooting that scene with the dog, and they said, did you have a dog as a child? And of course we did. And so, saying goodbye to the dog and leaving the dog upstairs, and when the family is down in the basement is that, that was, those sequences in the basement were really, really hard to shoot. Long days, it was pretty smelly and gross.
Yeah.
Method Kathy.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Now, this is a question that I'd like to ask to Bob Papazian, and it's a tough one here, but that's why I'm asking the producer. The threat of nuclear war is very real for a number of people, especially those who live near many of these nuclear missile silos, people who, as children, practice bomb drills, living through that. How do we make nuclear, the idea of nuclear destruction relevant to this generation so that we can have that same sense of urgency that we had in the 80s? What would you say to that, Bob?
Nick, could you
Yeah.
translate one?
Yeah.
I can't hear. Very difficult.
So I don't know if this mic is actually helping here. How do we make the threat of nuclear war relevant to today's audiences? The threats of nuclear war. How do we make that relevant to today's audiences?
Did you hear that, Bob?
I think I did.
I can repeat it. How do we make the threat of nuclear war today relevant to today's audiences?
That's a good question, because if I knew the answer to that, I'd own the world. The interesting thing is awareness. The more you make people aware of things and events and what goes on in the world and the political frictions, and the more educated you are, I think that brings things to the forefront. Nick said something very interesting a few minutes ago, where he said, a lot of people don't want to know about nuclear disaster, and they want to put their heads in the sand. And 40 years ago, when we made this movie, I believe everyone did. And I think that's why there was such curiosity. 100 million people saw our movie on one night. And it raised the controversy of why we should watch it, and what we should do about it. And it finally got to the ear or eyes of President Reagan, and he in turn did something about it. I think we can do all the grassroots movements that we want, but it has to fall on ears of people that can do something about it. I was recently with a couple senators on a luncheon, and I asked or said what my pet peeve is about nuclear war and nuclear exchange, and he gave me a very political answer. It's on the forefront of his mind. That's great, but how do you get things done? How do you start to denuclearize everything?
Well,
Go ahead.
if I could jump in for a second. We have two problems. One is nuclear war is so awful that nobody wants to think about it. And we have what's called the rubber band effect, where you learn something that's tremendously upsetting, that freaks you out, that totally shatters you. And then you have to brush your teeth, or you have to pick up your kid, or you have to go shopping. And bit by bit, you're able to dial back that panic and forget about nuclear war and just hope that somehow they, whoever the they is, can figure it out. That said, what happened with the day after was unique in our socio-cultural history. Number one, there were only 3 television networks. Number 2, there was no internet. So the idea of the entire country gathered around, and by the way, the reason the entire country gathered around was everybody told them not to. It's like, wet paint. The sign said wet paint. People had to touch the sign to see if it was really wet paint. Everybody said, don't look at this movie. It used to be that if you were banned in Boston, you had a book that was banned in Boston, that book was going to be a bestseller. And thanks to William Buckley and Phyllis Schlafly and Henry Kissinger and all those people saying, oh, you shouldn't see this movie, and see it with a priest, or see it with you're holding hands, or don't watch it. And then, then the controversy that was ginned up by this thing brought everybody together. And our country is now, we're so fragmented, and we're all glued to our own earbuds and our iPhones, that kind of group interaction is very hard to achieve.
There was a
We need to make a remake.
pre-production, I'm sorry.
We need to make a remake.
I get asked to do this. I get asked more than once a week.
I do know.
Yeah.
And let me just mention one thing, that this was in pre-production months before we started shooting. And I was in a publicity meeting with Brandon Stoddard, and there were probably 40 or 50 people in the room. And everyone was asking questions and throwing things out, and Brandon and I were fielding the questions. And I finally turned to Brandon and leaned over to him, and I said, you know, this could be bigger than Roots. And he turned to me and he says, bigger, my boy, bigger. And he was right on.
And Bob, while we're on the subject of Brandon Stoddard, let's all remember who got this movie made. Somebody who really stood up was Brandon Stoddard. Nobody at ABC wanted to make this guy had to resign. This guy had a bomb threat against his life, and he would not back off. So if we're celebrating moral courage or anything good that this film represents, a big chunk of it should be laid at the feet of this man who unfortunately is not alive to hear our
those who don't know who Brandon Stoddard was, he was the president of ABC, and more importantly, president of the movie division, both theatrically and television. So he was not only the whole idea emanated from his brain after seeing a movie, China Syndrome. And he never forgot that movie, and that movie stayed with him, and the theme of it did. And a few years later, he said, what if? And that what if became The Day After. And he, like Nick said, championed it all the way through to the end, and his superiors didn't want to have it. They didn't want him to put it on the air. But he pursued what he felt was morally correct.
He threatened to resign if it didn't get on the air.
Rest in peace.
If I threaten to resign, nothing happens.
Chris, go ahead.
So we just have a few minutes left here in Lawrence, but I especially want to hear from anyone who hasn't had a chance to say anything about how you're thinking about the day after 40 years later, and with television event now going to be on public television in the next year. How are you thinking about the film now, to wrap us up?
Maybe Walton Dornish, yeah.
Okay, so my thought is, it's been 40 years, and I keep on thinking, I didn't expect to get 40 years beyond The Day After, so I'm thinking so far so good. My other thought is, if you really wanted to get the message out about The Day After, is you could literally take the version that was shot back in 82, 83, and 4K it, and then take all the effects and do like modern day CGI.
Yeah.
And it would be the most terrifying thing, and take it to the theaters and challenge people to go see it. If you want, I mean, if you really want to bring back what was going on when The Day After originally aired, because we were just scared to death about the whole thing, that's the way to do it. Get rights to the movie and then release it in theaters.
I agree, Walt. I mean, you can really do that. And when I watched it the other day to refresh my memory, I thought, oh, what you could do with these effects today. You know, the technology has moved so far, and that can also augment the level of reaction that people have that might stir people to action.
Can I volunteer a contrary opinion?
Yeah.
I think one of the things I discovered in making this movie was that, again, people don't want to think about nuclear war. And I worried along the way that if what we made was a great movie, people would wind up talking about the movie, and they wouldn't talk about nuclear war. So if the cinematography was off the charts, if we had a catchy title theme song, if the special effects were so awesome that we talked about how did they do that, then they're not talking about the subject. What I wanted a blunt force instrument, something that was crude, and where you couldn't change the subject and say, wow, I love that music. I can't get that tune out of my head. Or Jason Robards, fantastic. That guy should get the Emmy for sure. That's not talking about the subject that nobody wants to talk about. And when we released the movie, when it was telecast, when we showed it to the press, they weren't interested in the movie either. All they wanted to know was, who started the war?
Right.
Anything, not to think about the subject.
The only thing I can say about that, let me add to that, and I said it a moment ago, the movie was so effective to Ronald Reagan that he did do something about it that led to the summit Reykjavik, which led to the denuclearization of intercontinental missiles in 1987. So the movie, whether it was good, bad, or different, I don't think that's not my point. My point is the art of communication through television reached somebody that was very important and did something about it.
If people want to know what to do about it now,
right.
I can tell you, you can write your congressman, you can write your senator, and by the way, a great place to start, get rid of the missile silos, get rid of the ICBMs that are in the movie. Those are stationary targets, and they're all pinned on our backs. Why don't we start by leaving nuclear defense to the Polaris, the Trident submarines, and get rid of those missile silos? Because by now, thanks to satellites, everybody knows where we keep them.
Yeah, really good point, Nick. And I think you said something quite some time ago where you said you thought of the day after like a PSA.
Yes.
That I totally embrace and think that it is a public service announcement and we could probably use.
But it takes 2 to 10.
Now we have...
You can't neutralize our systems without other systems being neutralized.
Now we
gotta have people talking to one another.
We have just 30 seconds.
Again, to lean back on what happened in 1987.
We
were talking about it at the highest level.
We have just a few seconds left. I'd love to hear from David Longhurst, the former mayor of Florence. Please, what do you have to add here?
I was mayor of Lawrence when the movie was shown on television. And because I was mayor, I was asked to appear after the film at the university campus. And I stood at the campanile at the top of the hill. And beneath me, there were probably over 1,000 people that had watched the film, and they were all holding candles. And it was dead silent. And they handed me the microphone, and I looked down at the crowd, and I said to them, you know, I had no prepared remarks. I said, you know, during the movie, there's a scene where things are getting more and more tense, things are getting swirling out of control, everyone's scared to death, and there's a scene in the movie where a little girl, and I personally know that girl, her name is Ellen Anthony, and she is a friend of mine. This little girl is scared to death, and she looks at her father and she says, there's not going to be a war, is there, Danny? The father did not know what to say to his little girl. I feel just like that father standing up here, looking at all of you, who are looking to me to say something to make everything okay. And I can't do that. I can't do that. All I can say to you is that we must never allow something like this to happen.
Amazing. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad that you can spend some of your time with this special moment. Thank you very much for joining us here. I'm so proud to show this to all of you. Thank you for being here.